Key world powers have been unable to reach a consensus on easing the conflict in the Syrian city of Aleppo. An emergency UN Security Council meeting was called by France with the aim of halting the offensive in the city to allow in humanitarian aid. But it descended into delegates trading accusations on obstructing the process.
The Security Council does not come together to answer the cries of the civilians that we have heard about again today because Russia, a permanent member, doesn't want to. That's it. It's very straightforward.
We share the grave concern of the plight of civilians in eastern Aleppo, but easing their suffering won't happen by ending the counter-terror operation. Leaving Syria and Iraq to a terrorist caliphate and appealing to the terrorists' humanity is no alternative.
This Security Council has completely failed to act. Russia has vetoed time and again to prevent the Security Council from finding the unity necessary to end this war.
There's no surprise it was France and the UK who have long and blatantly pushed for regime change in Syria and who have provided generous support for militants initiated this meeting, pretending they're concerned about the situation in eastern Aleppo. This meeting was a desperate attempt to use the Security Council to save terrorists from the destruction in Aleppo.
For months since the siege of eastern Aleppo began, we've met in this council to demand the basics. We've called for the Assad regime in Russia to allow unfettered humanitarian access to the Syrians in the city, for them to stop systematically bombing the city's hospitals, schools, markets, and the bases of the first responders.
If our Western colleagues really are so concerned by the plight of civilians in eastern Aleppo and of all Syria, then above all they need to take genuine practical steps, put an end to supporting terrorists and lift unilateral sanctions. That's what's required to provide genuine help. That's what Russia's doing, and not trying to use humanitarian problems to advance or achieve political goals.
Russia may again use its veto to prevent this council from offering help to the desperate civilians in eastern Aleppo, as it did in October. If it does so, placing its military aims over the survival of Syrian men, women, and children, member states must swiftly consider the other tools we can employ at the UN, including through the General Assembly, to apply more effective pressure.
Not exactly clear what other tools Ms. Power was referring to. It is possible she's been talking about new sanctions on Russia. There have been calls for new sanctions against Russia in the United States by various figures in response to actions by the Syrian military, which various U.S. officials do blame Russia for. However, she wasn't specific about what actions she thought should be taken. It is important to note that while Russian envoy Vitaly Churkin was speaking, U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power actually stormed out of the room. Now, that's a common diplomatic gesture. It's a way of expressing disgust or disapproval or protest to the comments of another diplomat. Now, it is important to note that U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power will not be holding this office for very long. Donald Trump, the president-elect of the United States, has already named her replacement, which will be Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina.
Well, former U.S. diplomat Jim Jatras believes America's UN envoy wants Security Council decisions to yield to Washington's policies.
It's amazing how many years Ambassador Power has been there and evidently does not have an elementary understanding of how the UN system works. There's a reason the founders of the UN put the responsibility for peace and security under Article 7 of the UN Charter with the Security Council, so that none of the permanent 5 nuclear members can feel backed into a corner. The United States repeatedly casts our veto on behalf of Israel. We would not give that up. Why do we expect the Russians to give that up if they feel that their vital interests are at stake in Syria? That's what the UN system was designed to do. Evidently, Ms. Power does not understand that. This is really a pathetic attempt at face-saving by the outgoing administration. The lame duck president, Mr. Obama, lame duck Ambassador Power. But the fact is, this is meaningless now. Everybody knows Assad is going to stay. Everybody knows that the only way to stop this war would be for some kind of a common position against the terrorists like Al-Qaeda, which controls East Aleppo, which American media conveniently omit referencing.